So you're here because you want to learn to study the Bible. It is easier than you think. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I'm going to show you today the 3 steps that I use to highlight a passage, annotate or mark up a passage, and break it down verse by verse. And better than that, we're going to study Ecclesiastes, written by the wisest man who ever lived, King Solomon, and he's going to be tackling the question, the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? The age-old question that we all are still searching for the answer to. So let's jump in to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. So if you have been following the channel, you know that I use a highlighting system that's color-coded. I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen. And a little bit further in the video, you will see, I'll show you my text and you'll see how I've used that color coding system. You'll also see my annotating system, which again, I'll go ahead and put up on the screen, and you'll see that in my notes as well, that I'll show you at the end of the study. But we're going to go ahead and read through chapter 1 and then break it down verse by verse and see what are the key takeaways that we can learn about the meaning of life from the wisest man who ever lived. Here we go. These are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south and then turns north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here is something new, but actually it is old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really, it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. What is wrong cannot be made right. What is missing cannot be recovered. I said to myself, look, I am wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all this is like chasing the wind. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Okay, so you may not know what any of that means, but let's break it down. Excuse me, I am trying to get over a cold. But we are going to look at this passage and we're just going to take each scripture and we're going to talk about the overarching themes. This was the New Living Translation, so I didn't mention that. So I wanted to go ahead and mention that. I am reading from the New Living Translation. And one of the key things that we want to understand right off the bat about this book, when I do my Bible studies, I always first answer the questions of who the author was, which is King Solomon, the audience. This was written to the ecclesia or to the body at large, so it's for everyone. The setting, this was written towards the final years of King Solomon's life. And the purpose is to demonstrate that life under the sun, and we're going to talk about what that means, is meaningless. And that phrase, under the sun, is really important because it describes life without an eternal viewpoint, without looking at life through the lens that there is something beyond the here and now. So there's no eternal point of view. Yes, he does believe there is a God, but this God does not have anything to do with what happens beyond the life that we live here on earth. So I'm going to refer here to my notes because I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. But the purpose of the book is to demonstrate the meaninglessness of life when you hold a worldview that does not include God or an eternal point of view. So that is the point of the book. Now, as we get into this book, you're going to see that the phrase under the sun is repeated throughout the passage. And in an under the sun world, it is a world that what you see is all there is. This is it. There's nothing that's coming after this. There's no eternal point of view. So that's an under the sun world, a world where there is nothing divine or nothing eternal after this. Okay, so then if we want to go ahead and jump in, let's look at verses 1 and 2, where verse 1, he introduces himself. He calls himself the teacher. He acknowledges that he is King David's son who ruled in Jerusalem. So we know the author is King Solomon, who the Bible tells us is the wisest man who ever lived. And here he is tackling this huge philosophical question of what is the meaning of life. And then in verse 2, he says everything is meaningless, completely meaningless. And so here he's starting to set the tone for the book, emphasizing that this life is very temporary and it's inconsequential because, again, he's looking at it from the viewpoint of a man who does not believe that there's anything eternal beyond this life on earth. Then he goes into verses 3 through 7, and he's starting to talk about the cyclical nature of life, the repetitive nature of life. So he says, generations come, generations go, but the earth doesn't change. The sun rises and the sun sets, and then it hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south, and then it turns around and blows north, and then it comes back and blows again in circles. So he's talking about all these very repetitive, cyclical nature or cycles that occur in nature, I should say. And he's saying that what is the point of it all? Nothing changes. Nothing is really ever new. And so he is pointing out that under the sun, in this under the sun world, is still this idea that from a purely human and earthly perspective, there's no acknowledgement that there's any importance to these cycles in light of the fact that what does it all mean if there's nothing after this? So I hope that makes sense and you're tracking with that. So that's what he's going through in verses 3 through 7. And then we continue on to verse 8. And he talks about how human desires are insatiable. He says, no, everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. So humans are never fully satisfied. The eyes and the ears, they're always longing for more, despite, all of the human effort and all of the human endeavor. You work tirelessly to attain things that will eventually pass away. So he's saying, we try to do more, we try to go harder, we try to grind more, we try to obtain more. And it's just wearisome and tiring because it's all going to pass away. So we see here, Solomon is in a very pessimistic state of mind because he's looking at life from an under the sun world. What is all of this for? Why do I work so hard? Why do I grind so hard? Why do I tirelessly try to attain when it's just going to all pass away? So let's see how he continues in verses 9 through 11. He talks about there's nothing new under the sun and that history merely repeats itself. It's all been done before. And people say there is something new, but in reality, there isn't. And whenever I read this verse, I think of fashion. People come out with something that seems like a new trend, but if you go back far enough, that's been in fashion before, and maybe we have just slightly tweaked it. Every so many decades, the bell bottoms will come back. Well, they used to be called bell bottoms. Now they're called flare jeans, so you get what I'm saying. I don't know, but that scripture always makes me think of fashion. But he asserts that in history, it just repeats itself and that there's truly nothing new under the sun. And even the supposed new things will be forgotten, and they're just going to be repetitions of the past. So we continue on, and he is now going to go into the mindset of, well, what can I do? Is there anything that I can do so I can find some meaning in this life? And so he starts out by using wisdom. And what it says here, as he's using wisdom to find the meaning of life, it is not godly wisdom or divine wisdom. It is a very practical wisdom, man's wisdom, day-to-day life wisdom. That is what he's referring to in these verses. And he says that he's going to reflect on his quest for the meaning of life through wisdom. And then he concludes that greater wisdom just leads to greater sorrow because it reveals the depths of life's meaningness. So the more wisdom you have, the more you can really grasp or ascertain how meaningless all of this toiling is. If you, again, are looking at it in an under the sun world. And it just confirms that God has given us an internal desire to live life with purpose, to desire more. He's so discontented here in these scriptures 12 through 18, when he says, I look at myself, I am wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and greater knowledge than any of them. So I set out to use that wisdom, that man-made wisdom, and I applied it to madness and I applied it to folly. And I learned firsthand that pursuing all of that was just like chasing the wind. So no matter how intelligent and how wise he was, in the end, he compares that earthly, practical, day-to-day wisdom like chasing the wind, an impossible and fruitless pursuit of just meaningless, unattainable goals. And it conveys the idea that I have here in my notes, that it conveys the idea that human efforts to find ultimate fulfillment in wisdom or purpose in earthly things often just results in disappointment, as they are just as elusive and you can't grasp them just as you can't grasp the wind. So you are going to see that he finds in chapter 1 that trying to find the meaning of life simply through wisdom, man's wisdom, practical day-to-day wisdom, it still was disappointing, and it still left him feeling like it was all, what he does, his life is all for nothing. He's going to switch gears in chapter 2 and try to find the meaning of life through another means. However, if you wanted to see the notes, I promised I would show you my notes. So here's a picture of how I have marked up chapter 1. You'll see that I've highlighted in pink the verse that I'm going to memorize, which is verse 17, chapter 1, verse 17. I have highlighted in purple key themes of this chapter, which is everything is meaningless in verse 2, and then again in verse 14, observing everything going on under the sun, and it is all meaningless like chasing the wind. Then I've got my keywords, or words that are repeated. I've got those with rectangles around them according to my annotating system. So you can see that here on the screen. And then you'll see that I've underlined characteristics of God that he meaning Solomon felt that God has actually dealt a tragic existence to the human race because God has created this hole in us, in our soul, that longs for eternity, which is why we need to have purpose and our lives need to have meaning. Humans are the only species like that. I don't think our dogs or cats or animals care if their life has purpose or meaning, but humans especially have that internal need, that hole in their soul for meaning and purpose. And he knows, Solomon knows that that was put there by God. And so that's what he says there in verse 13. I soon discovered that God has dealt what he calls a tragic existence, meaning this longing. He's put this longing in us, and I can't figure out what the meaning of life is, but I'm longing for it. And I know this longing comes from God. And in an under the sun world, you won't find it because you're looking at life without a view of eternity, without considering what goes on in light of eternity. So these are my thoughts on how to break this passage down, where we're going to see Solomon go next, because he's going to shift gears in chapter 2 and figure out, is there any meaning in life if I pursue it through another means, which we'll look at in chapter 2. So make sure you have your notifications on so you catch that video. But if you want to have a further explanation of my simple method that's effective, it's going to get you an in-depth understanding of the scriptures, but it's still something that you do not have to have a theology degree. We're not theologians over here. We're just students of the Bible. It will still get you a good in-depth understanding, and you don't have to be bogged down with too many additional resources. If you're new to the Bible, you may not, have commentaries and dictionaries and things like that, but you can still follow the method that I've discussed in this video right here, and it will help you understand what it is that I just did in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. So I'll see you in that video.